The original PlayStation is by far one of the most unique and experimental games consoles ever created, with a whole plethora of unique and obscure games that most of us have never seen and have still yet to witness. Many of the games in question were usually confined to the Japanese region, and in many cases the only snippets of information we would get back in the day would either be through some sort of a magazine article, or someone that you would know, say in the school playground, would have access to a photograph or some sort of magazine snippet of a preview of a game, but that would be all you would hear of it. So it was a cool aspect, and it always got you excited to figure out what could have been. But in saying that, the PlayStation just has a ridiculous amount of experimental titles. And one of the games that we're talking about in this video that has garnered quite a very popular following in Japan alone, and even beginning to make its way outside of it, is Pepsiman. And Pepsiman was released for the PlayStation in Japan only in 1999, and it was based off of an idea to heavily promote the Pepsi brand in Japan to more consumers. So it took this idea of Pepsiman to become the mascot for Pepsi's Japanese branch, and it became that popular that inevitably a video game was created in its honour, which is quite unheard of, but yet at the same time is quite unreal when you think about it too. But back in the 90s, that was definitely a thing with regards to games companies and even brands. They would make games based off of them. You don't see that now today at all, which in many ways was really cool because it exposed people to specific brands. It made them more acquainted with brands that they would have already been accustomed to, and it would have helped to really build that connection between buyer and consumer and the brand itself. So where Pepsiman comes in, it definitely helped to popularise the mascot and the overall brand itself in the Japanese region back in the day, and you can see why that it was so popular. But funnily enough, we didn't get a release of the game outside of Japan, but it was one of those games that had garnered quite a cult following over the years that many people wanted to play it. Now, luckily enough with the internet, we can gain access to copies of the game online through the likes of eBay and other marketplaces, but if not, you can also play it through emulation. So it is a good opportunity to play a very unique game from that time period. So with the game itself, you play as Pepsiman, and the goal is to complete a variety of different levels or missions, all with specific objectives, where people are starting riots in various cityscapes and environments because of the lack of Pepsi that's available, as people are pretty much collapsing and dying with thirst. So that's kind of the idea behind the game, which is quite bonkers when you think about it, but that's just the experimental nature of the games that were being developed on the PlayStation back then. They had all of these wacky ideas. Now, when you think of it, they may not have worked when you think of it on paper, but once executed, they managed to appeal to quite a few people, and that was just a really cool aspect about it. That's why I love the PlayStation myself, because I love that wacky nature and the ideas that were presented in the games. Some of the best games that I've personally played are some of the ones that are completely out there that you would never even think would be good, but ended up being way better than you would expect because you gave them a chance. But in saying that, Pepsiman, the goal is to complete the missions while completing various objectives. Now, the gameplay is very linear because it's pretty much like a run or racing type game, but your goal is to run from one end of the level to the next while avoiding various obstacles and collecting Pepsi cans along the way to build up your overall score. Now, you do have different elements in the game as well, where at each stage or different stages of the level there will be a change in the control or the play style dynamic, where something will happen where the Pepsiman will get overwhelmed or overcome with something, where he'll end up being covered with a dustbin, and what it does is you can't see where you're going, and as a result it completely reverses the control elements on the controller. So instead of you going right and left, it actually has the opposite effect, so left is right and right is left. So you have to adapt very quickly to the change in pace in the gameplay to again avoid obstacles so that you don't lose all your lives. And the game itself, while it has a lot of funny elements, which it does. It is a very funny game. It can be a little bit on the clunky side, like it's not perfect, but it's so wacky in its nature that you do put that aside. But it does get frustrating, I will admit, later on in the game, especially when you get into later levels. Like there's 4 levels in total, but each level has about at least 3 missions in each, and 2 of them are usually comprised of getting from point A to point B. You usually have to get to like a soda or Pepsi machine. Then you'll be taken on to another level where you have to complete more objectives to go through the same thing again. And usually the last level is usually you being put in a position where you have to run away from something that's going to kill you or crush you. And the whole aspect really about the game is just funny and wacky things that every time the hero Pepsiman tries to intervene with something idiotic or just completely stupid happens. Like he gets knocked over by a truck, or something falls on his head, or a load of people just get in his way, or something. It's just super silly, and that's what's really funny about the game. If you've ever played the game Courier Crisis, while it is a very different game, but it does have some similar elements in terms of the fun factor and the wacky style elements and just silly things that happen in the game. I haven't made a previous video on that game if you want to check it out. And it has very similar elements. You will notice them when you're playing it. And I think that's where it works really well with it. I think the clunkiness of these type of games actually does bode well with the wacky nature of the ideas that are being presented. While they're not that easy to pick up and play, which they're not, but you will have a lot of fun with it if you put time into it. Now, in saying that, when I was playing this game here, now I had played it years ago through emulation, and it was one of those games that I had been meaning to do a video on and get back into it, but I wanted to sit down and actually give it a full playthrough. I did manage to complete it, but let's just put it this way, it drove me mad the amount of times you have to restart the game and the amount of times that you die on silly elements, because some of the obstacles and obstructions in the game are so close together that sometimes you don't have time to react to specific elements. But then again, I could be just saying that because I'm getting older. I don't have the same dexterity in my hands as I used to when I'm playing the controller, so I find for me it was a bit of a struggle. That's where I was playing it through emulation, and the save states were your best friend, in all honesty, because it's the only way you would finish the game. Mind you would have to re-attempt the same segment of a level, I don't know how many times, up to hundreds of times, maybe even thousands in some cases, depending on who's playing it, in order just to get one good run at it. And that's usually my case. If I don't do a segment on the first try, I may forget about it. I may as well just turn the game off, because it will literally take me 100 tries just to get one good run at it. But I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure you guys out there listening to this are probably in the same boat, and you have been with many of the games that you've played. And Pepsiman is no different to that. It will test you. You will have a good laugh with it, don't get me wrong. It is very wacky, it is very quirky, but it will drive you crazy all the same. But even with that, the funny thing about it is there's many elements of the game that actually has contributed to various factors outside of gaming, and even to a point that it has built up such a substantial following that you now have fans making their own versions or remakes of the game that you can download on the likes of itch.io and other types of websites. While they're not as well polished, they may have updated the graphics. Now the controls can still be a little bit on the clunky side, if anything. Some cases they're probably worse than the original, but they're still playable. But they are worth looking at anyway, just to see a more modern version of the game. But if not, you can always just go back and play the original. It's still a quick, fun game to pick up and play in short bursts. It will drive you mad, but if you're looking for something quick and quirky and just that's completely bonkers, this is the game for you, really, in all respects of it. Each of the levels do have their own nuances and quirks, but you do have different checkpoints that if you can get to a certain point in the level, you will be able to continue on from that point should you lose a life. So at least it will lessen the burden of being able to figure out how things work. Because some of the elements in the game with regards to the traps and the obstacles, it will take a couple of attempts to figure out what to do. But it is what it is. Again, it's not a AAA title, it is a low budget title in all respects to it, but it has enough unique elements and it just fully utilises and showcases the unique and very obscure and experimental nature and even wacky nature of the PlayStation. I like to call it the weird and wacky world of the PlayStation in all respects to it. I must actually make a video on that now, that's a good idea. But yeah, it's still one of those games I definitely think you should try out. Like, with regards to the amount of games that are out on the PlayStation that were released in Japan, I haven't even begun to cover cover I don't even know how many there's out there. It's ridiculous. But my goal is to definitely try and cover as many games as possible and showcase them to you guys that are watching. So be sure to stick around, as there will be a lot more. And even just on another note as well, even from some of the research that you can find online, if you look through various fan sites like Wikipedia and other types of websites out there, because there's a lot of fans that really do love this game. Like, Pepsiman was so popular in Japan that he also made a cameo in Fighting Vipers in the Japanese region. If you've ever played Fighting Vipers either in the arcade, and it was also released for the likes of the Sega Saturn and was later released on the likes of the PlayStation 3 and so forth in later years. But in the Japanese version of Fighting Vipers, Pepsiman is a hidden character in the game that you can play as. So that'll tell you how popular he actually was, which is pretty cool in all respects to it. But I would love to know your thoughts on Pepsiman and what do you think of it overall. Did you think it's a fun and wacky game, or have you even yet to play the game in general? And if so, I definitely would give it a go for sure. But if you would like to see a full playthrough of Pepsiman, or even playthroughs of some of the more modern fan remakes, I'll leave videos here on the screen and also leave links to them in the description so that you can go and check them out, so that you can really get an idea of how the game is presented and what you will think of it yourself. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.